I've played more than a few RPGs in my time, but I can safely say that Planescape Torment not only has one of the best stories among them, but it's one of a kind. Well, almost. The Disco Elysium guys were very vocal about how much they were influenced by this game, and they made a very dialogue-heavy story concerning a protagonist with amnesia. But that game has enough of its own personality to be considered something unique unto itself. So Torment is another game I saw on the shelves in-game back when I was getting into D&D for the first time. I'd dipped my toes into Baldur's Gate at that point, but hadn't quite cracked it. In fact, I recall I returned Baldur's Gate the first time I bought it, and picked it up a couple of years later, when I was a more curious and patient man who'd read both the Baldur's Gate books and was deep in the Drizzt Do'Urden series by that point. Best Dark Alliance character. So, similar to Siberia and some other classics of that era that I either got to a few years later or like a few months ago at the time of writing, this one just slipped past me for no other reason than my attention was elsewhere at the time. I'd seen it on the shelves and could see it was kinda like some other games that I played and enjoyed, but there was just something else to spend my time and money on that had priority. Also, the box was, well, it's odd, right? And doesn't exactly scream epic RPG adventure at you, though it certainly communicates that something here is very different. Fast forward to 2025, and I'm doing YouTube as a hobby and low-paying side hustle, exploring my own nostalgia games, some newer entries, especially those indie retro types, and games from my youth that I missed at the time. Please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you enjoy the video. Patreon is here, membership's here, coffee is here. Nailed it. Seamless transition. So, over the winter vacation period, I basically want to stay home and hide in a fort made of blankets for 3 weeks. That's not to say I don't get out to explore some of Japan's winter wonderland experience, but I've got time for both. It was around this time in 2024 that I got into watching Grimbeard's videos while going through my morning routine. Let it be known that I will show up for any content concerning the survival horror Nocturne game and Blair Witch Rustin Parr. Truly unique and interesting takes on survival horror. As such, his video on Planescape found itself sliding gracefully into my YouTube recommends, and I was like, oh yeah, that. I wonder what that's all about. What the hell? No orcs, swords, or dragons? Philosophical questions on the nature of identity and the self? Questions about free will? Moral ambiguity? A hero with amnesia walking through the wreckage he left behind in the life he forgot? Oh god. I have to try this. So Planescape Torment was immediately added to wishlist. Or rather, it would have been if it wasn't already on sale. It wound up being purchased and installed immediately, though I had another RPG to clear before I could really sink my teeth into it. I was only a few hours into my first playthrough before I realized I had to start again and press the record button, because god damn did I want to talk about this now. It wasn't all smooth sailing to be sure, but any problems I can and will absolutely and repeatedly highlight about this game are overshadowed by one absolute fact. This is one of the best stories I've experienced not just in an RPG, but in any video game. So gather around, my friends, come warm yourself by the fire, and would you kindly stay a while and listen, and let me tell you a story, an epic tale of power, love, betrayal, greed, selfishness, and madness, and the search for the answer to one all-important question. What can change the nature of a man? Just about everything about Planescape Torment flies in the face of conventional fantasy RPGs, and it's hard to think of many games even now that are so bold in throwing out the genre conventions to just run off and do their own thing like this. I said it was hard, I didn't say it was impossible. Planescape is not the story of the underdog heroes who defeat God with the power of friendship. It's not a tale of mighty warriors, dark lords, and a single, all-powerful MacGuffin that can change the fate of the world. It's not even about epic sword fights. There isn't a single elf or goblin in the entire game, and by the end of the story, no lives are changed or wrongs righted, outside of those of the small group of travellers we've been working with. Though there are, arguably, farther-reaching consequences. Our protagonist isn't some handsome prince, valiant knight, or farm boy chosen to inherit godly powers. He's a scarred and ugly mass of flesh, stripped to nothing but a loincloth, and stinking of embalming fluid. His greatest weapon is an endless supply of questions, and he's joined by a floating skull with eyes and a PhD in snark. We're not related. We don't have a rambling adventure over mountains or through forests, but there are a couple of dungeons to explore. No dragons though. Instead, we wade through the garbage and filth in a land where even the rats are so dangerous as to wield magical powers. The game proactively spits in the face of every genre convention that exists, even going so far as to start at the place where almost every other game ends, with our protagonist lying dead on a slab and being wheeled through a dark crypt by a zombie. Still, if he ever was dead, it seems to be a mild inconvenience at best, as we see him twitch and move on the slab, while in his mind flashes of memory flare up inside him. We see accusing faces and ominous skulls staring at us, as if we are the perpetrator of some terrible crimes. We see a smooth, pale-skinned face become consumed with scars and blackened skin. We watch as each of these memories falls into oblivion and is completely lost, and as our helpful zombie shuffles away, our protagonist opens his eyes once again. So before we can be turned loose on not just this world but potentially all the planes connected to it, we need to create a character. This isn't going to take very long though, as the majority of choices that someone has to make when creating a D&D character have either already been made for us, or will be made as a result of the actions we take later in the game. We aren't going to be choosing the race or gender of our character, because we're all going to be controlling this scarred mass of a walking hangover, and we only need to worry about assigning his ability points at the start. I began playing Dungeons Dragons not long after 3rd edition came out, so I never really understood what the hell THAC0 was. Still, you don't have to know this. Aside from understanding that a lower armor class is better than a higher armor class in this game, things are more or less what you'd expect in an RPG. You've got 6 primary attributes, these being Strength, Dexterity, Constitution, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma, and it's fairly easy to figure out intuitively what these all do, and which you'll want to invest big into depending on the character you want to play. Well, almost. You see, while Planescape, just like any Dungeons & Dragons based game, gives you the chance to create a variety of character builds, there is something like an optimal build that will get you the most out of the game, and no, it's not a stealth archer or a crit spamming paladin this time. Planescape Torment is a story focused game that puts its conversations before its combat, almost to its detriment. There are fights, too many if you want my opinion, but for the most part you'll be talking to people, and being good at that will open up a wider variety of options in conversations, and may just help you skip quite a lot of fights in the end. As such, you're best off putting all your points into Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma, and maybe throwing anything left over into your Constitution so that you don't die from stepping on a particularly sharp twig. Not that you really have to worry about dying in this game. Going this route does mean you're going to be playing a wizard though, as a fighter or rogue with nothing in strength or dexterity is going to be more of a hindrance than a help to any party. Wizards have their own unique set of problems that I'll bring up later though. What's more frustrating at the start is that you'll default to being a fighter and have to unlock the wizard class later in the game. This is because of the amnesia plot hook. The Nameless one, yes, you won't be choosing a name either, has completely lost his memory. And while he has the knowledge of decades of study in the arcane arts and stealthing around dark places to steal purses and cut throats buried somewhere in that thick skull of his, he can, at best, swing a big stick at the start of the game, and will need a jolt and a bit of help to unlock some of those more refined skills later. On the other hand, you are going to be a member of a party very quickly, and I'd actually recommend just checking a guide and running off to recruit your first follower once you're out the door, but I'll get back to that later. Rather than choosing your alignment, you'll start off as a true neutral blank slate, and your actions in the world will ultimately decide how you measure up in the eyes of the universe. So, with that out of the way, It's time to return to our cold stone slab, as our newly made protagonist wakes up and asks that most important of all questions. Who the hell am I? Escaping the sweet oblivion of death no doubt comes with a lot of physical pain and disorientation thrown in for good measure.
Feels like I've been through a shredder.
But just imagine waking up on a cold stone slab in a drafty room, surrounded by shambling, rotting corpses, with no memory of who you are or how you got here. Now add a floating disembodied skull gliding up to you and immediately asking you questions, and none of this sounds like a recipe for a good time. Torment is a very in at the deep end kind of experience. The setting and learning about it are just as interesting and important as unraveling the mystery of our protagonist's many lives. So rather than just lore dump everything on us up front with some kind of extended cutscene or opening crawl, we're left to walk around and ask an absolute mountain of questions of everyone we meet and build our idea of the world we live in and the person we are, piece by piece along the way. The first part of unraveling that puzzle is Mort. Mort is our first and probably best companion, and he's going to be with us all the way through this adventure. Well, he was in my case anyway. Mort is a mimer. Mimer. Mort is a mimer. Let's go with mimer. A kind of constructed floating encyclopedia, or so he tells us, which is incredibly convenient for someone with no memory to have. He first tries to talk the protagonist around and realizes he's lost all his memories. And not for the first time, it seems. Mort also notes that there are a variety of tattoos covering the massive scar tissue that makes up our protagonist's skin. One such tattoo, etched into his back, is nothing less than a series of instructions regarding what to do in the event he loses his memories. The important points are, you are immortal, you have died many times, and those deaths can come with a hard memory reset. You should consult your journal to be brought up to speed on the situation, and it is very important that you don't lose that journal. Finally, you should find a man named Farad as he can help you. As the Nameless one points out, no wonder my back hurts, there's a damn novel written on there. Since the journal in question is nowhere to be found and will remain lost for the duration of the game, the best we can do is get out of this place and try to find this Farad. Along the way though, we'll get the idea that we need to start keeping a journal of our own, and you are going to be hearing this soundbite a lot.
Updated my journal. Updated my journal. Updated my journal. Updated my journal. Updated my journal.
For those who come after, I guess. While we have to brain our first zombie to get the key to get out of this room, we are advised very quickly by Mort to not make a habit of it. You see, while the average high fantasy enjoyer might think this is some sort of necromancer's lair, and that they're going to have to grind their way through in order to win their freedom, it couldn't be anything further from that. This is just sanitation service, and all these corpses that are shuffling around agreed to this. Everyone is working, and providing they aren't disturbed, they shouldn't bother us in turn. Likewise, Mort has, let's say, some less than Christian ideas about what else can be done with these corpses. Our exploration of Mortuary is fascinating in and of itself, and serves as a light tutorial dungeon. Here we'll learn some simple rules like talk to everyone. While most of the zombies in this place have numbers rather than names, they are all individuals.
You're all individuals! Yes, we're all individuals!
And a lot of them have unique interactions.
You're all different! Yes, we are all different! I'm not.
I actually restarted the game 3 times before doing this playthrough for capture, and each time I stumbled into a unique interaction that I'd missed the time before. So get used to talking, because it's the meat of the game, and the more we talk, the more we'll learn. This area is worthy of a fairly lengthy analysis in and of itself, but let's push on to the 2 most important interactions we'll have through this opening section, and the first is Dahl. Among the many shambling corpses, we encounter a truly ancient creature that should for all intents and purposes be dead, yet still counts himself among the living, if only barely. This figure is bent over a truly massive ledger, and while Mort may object to us trying to interact with him, this ancient thing is very willing to share the chant with us. Dahl greets us as one he has met many times. He tells the Nameless One that he has seen him brought into these halls over and over again, only to have him stand up and saunter out not long after, stating that this place is practically his home. That being said, when asked if he knows the Nameless One, the reply is this: "Know you? There is a trace of bitterness in the scribe's voice as he speaks. "I have never known you, Restless One, no more than you have known yourself." He is silent for a moment. "For you have forgotten, have you not?" So not only has Dahl seen this Immortal's corpse brought here many times, but he's also had the same conversation with him, and is well aware of his affliction. Dahl is willing to tell the Nameless One about Mortuary and about his faction, the Dustmen. We can talk a little more about factions later, as the Dustmen are especially interesting. For now, let's just say they are the custodians of all the dead in this place. Corpses are brought to them, and they in turn prepare them for cremation, and Dahl specifically pens their name in the Dead Book. The Dustmen await and revere death as an escape from the shadow of life into the bliss of true oblivion, meaning to them, an immortal like our hero would be considered something of an abomination. Still, Dahl has seen this poor wretch come and go so many times now that he is hardly fazed at all. Dahl also tells the Nameless One, "Where you walk, so walks misery." This is in reference to his companions. It would seem that death travels with him, and those who walk at his side are doomed to fall. He asks that the Nameless One not gather others to him anymore, that he carry his burden alone. He also directs him to a memorial on the first floor level, where a woman whom he travelled with is now interred, before they part ways, presumably until the Nameless One's next death. This section is not done with teaching us the rules of the game yet though. Among the zombies and the skeletons that do the heavy lifting around here are several other Dustmen. One of these will give you your first side quest if you just talk to her. The others will be wondering what you're doing here. Saying the wrong thing in this conversation will lead to the entire area turning hostile on you and you having to fight your way out. That is, unless you are killed. Then you'll just wake up on the slab again, but this time without the memory loss. I wonder what the rules for that are exactly. Still, since you're very clearly dead in the eyes of the Dustmen, the dungeon will reset and you can take another crack at just walking out the front door. Before we do that though, there is one place we have to visit, and one tragic soul we have to talk to. Like most of the moments in the game, this encounter will take some time to be fully understood. As we move into the northwest wing of the first floor of Mortuary, the music shifts into a haunting melody that literally reaches into your heart and begins plucking on the very strings of your soul. This one melody probably shaped my entire playthrough, and this one encounter drove home something profound about who I had been before. It told me that whoever that was, I needed to be better this time. This was further enhanced when I looked upon the lost and restless spirit of Daeonara, and was filled with guilt and regret for whatever crime it was I had committed against her, even without knowing what that was. As we approach her, her opening words are hate-filled barbs.
You! What is it that brings you here? Have you come to see firsthand the misery you have wrought? Perhaps in death I still hold some shred of use for you, my love.
But those last words, my love, say so much more, especially when all I have to offer her is total ignorance. The spirit makes a begging motion with her hands. How can it be that the thieves of the mind continue to steal my name from your memory? Do you not remember me, my love? The ghost stretches out her arms. Think. Her voice becomes desperate again. The name Daeonara must evoke some memory within you. And just like that, even beyond her death and the obliteration of my memory, I am able to inflict a great wound upon her without intending to. I can only imagine what evils I perpetrated when I knew her. Despite the connection she claims we share, she can tell us little of ourselves beyond that death rejects us and we have lived countless lifetimes. And in that time we have attained mastery of uncountable skills, only to have them stolen from us upon our death. However, we can sometimes reach back into our lost memories and recover some of what we once knew. She tells us we have a great mastery over life and death, and as that memory resurfaces, we gain the power to resurrect any who travel with us as close comrades. The power is not without its limits, but it's going to be very useful in our trials to come. and so we leave Mortuary. Dayanara remains trapped between the world of the living and the dead, unable to move on, eternally waiting for the man who can never die, that they may depart for the next life together. And we leave this realm of the dead and the near-dead, and finally step out into Sigil. Oh my god, what the hell is any of this? Well, to unravel that, we're going to need to talk about this game's development and look into how and why Planescape is the way it is. Don't worry, we'll return to our scarred hero and his snarky floating friends soon enough, but for now, we need to meet a few interesting people, and the first of them is Zeb Cook. When playing tabletop Dungeons & Dragons with your friends, it can be satisfying for a group to collectively build the world they're exploring, and believe it or not, this is actually how some of your favourite RPG worlds were created. It is, however, a massive amount of work, which is where campaign settings such as Forgotten Realms, which is where we find places like Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter and Icewind Dale, come into play. They are basically store-bought worlds, with history and lore that you can drop your characters into and have them walk around. They are filled with established heroes and legends that help remove the idea that this is a world focused on the players, and gives games masters, or GMs, lots of information about places and cultures that can go towards helping them write great adventures in a world that feels very much alive. All of this, including the rules for that matter, exist on a take-it-or-leave-it basis. While there is established canon lore in every setting, you are not compelled in any way to include things you don't want in your story, and likewise, any catastrophic events that take place in your campaign shouldn't affect anyone else's. So Planescape is a campaign setting just like these, but one that is very, very different indeed. When creating a D&D character, one thing you need to assign is their alignment. This is something like a moral worldview that dictates your character's behaviour. However, since this is a fantastical world of many deities who speak directly to their worshippers, and even get involved in the affairs of mortals, there are no questions that these ideas stem from a kind of objective standard embodied by these gods. This is something of a two-way street though. The actions, thoughts and prayers of the people on the prime material plane give shape to the outer planes, which gives rise to the gods, who in turn affect the material plane, and this creates an infinite chicken and egg regression. So gods that aren't worshipped lose all their power, and those with larger followings command much greater power. The gods exist in the Outer Planes, a collection of dimensions that are inspired by numerous mythologies that I think most of us will recognise to one degree or another. Each of these planes is aligned in some way between lore and chaos and good and evil, and their inhabitants reflect those core concepts. So while both the devils of the Nine Hells and the demons of the Infinite Abyss are evil, Hell is lawful and full of strict hierarchies. Their armies are organised and disciplined, and devils delight in contracts and agreements to trap those unlucky enough to stumble across them in debts that will literally cost them their souls. The demons, on the other hand, embody chaos. They are a rabid mob driven by their passions and bloodlust. They delight in carnage and destruction, and are only brought into line by the most powerful among their number, who can then direct their blind fury at their enemies. And because their nature is something fundamental to their existence, they can't abide the existence of each other, and have been locked in an eternal conflict known as the Blood War since the concept of Up emerged and created Down as a result of it. This is somewhat akin to the Hindu or Buddhist idea of the Wheel of Samsara. The denizens of the upper and lower planes are shackled to their nature in an almost impossible to change way, while the more complex creatures of the prime plane at the heart of it all can see shades of grey and nuance. Their views and ideas can shift and change based on situations, and their experiences can both make and change their nature. And changing the nature of a man is going to be an important theme going forward.
What can change the nature of a man?
In 1st edition D&D, the planes weren't all that well developed, and were generally just there to explain alignment and the existence of all kinds of powerful mythological creatures that could become problems for our heroes at some point. By the time we got to Advanced D&D though, this was a place that Tactical Studies Rules, or TSR, wanted to expand out into somewhere that players would want to explore more, and that is where Zeb Cook enters our story. In an interview with IGN, when asked about turning the planes into an actual campaign setting, Zeb said, "With Planescape, I set out to make a world very different from the others TSR had. A world that was really more like the fantasy of a dream where nothing makes sense, but it all seems right anyway." He was given a lot of freedom to do what he wanted with the project, and a big part of making these terrifying and alien worlds accessible to players was creating a hub. A truly neutral ground that could play host to creatures from all over the planes. One where an all-powerful and unknown force kept everyone in line, and one that would be connected to all the other planes by countless doors. This place is called Sigil. To quote the same interview again, he said, "I gave the players a base of operations in Sigil, a city at the center of the planes that potentially had doors to anywhere and everywhere. I gave it a powerful and mysterious protector, the Lady of Pain, that nobody, including me, knew what she was or what she could and couldn't do. I tried to give the players interesting places to go and interesting people to meet. Since fighting gods mano a mano was most likely a no-win deal, I tried to create more mystery and wonder, characters and reasons to go talk to them. Anyway, now I'm blathering. Mostly I created a place that was just unlike any others because that's what I always wanted. I was tired of big muscled swordsmen and rescuing princesses and cleaning out dungeons. I wanted a fantasy of ideas, so that's what I tried to do." So even long before Torment was being developed, the planes were very much about subverting everything we come to expect from fantasy role-playing games and settings. We have realms that play home to literal gods, angels and devils, and at the center of it all, in the heart of the Outlands, atop a great spire, we have the Taurus city of Sigil. And this is the world that our nameless protagonist steps into, and where our adventure takes place. Interplay, Black Isle Studios and BioWare are all names I think we all know here, and all of whom were instrumental in the creation of this game. We'll leave BioWare to one side for now. One day I'm going to do a video on the original Dragon Age, so maybe we can get into their rise and fall at that time. But they provided the game engine that Torment was built in, and their success with Baldur's Gate basically led to Interplay wanting more AD&D games on the shelves, which is how Chris Avallone, former creative director of Obsidian Entertainment, wound up being handed the Planescape setting, the Infinity Engine, a team of coders and artists, and told to make more or less whatever kind of mess he wanted with them. In an interview with RPG Watch, when asked why Planescape, Chris says, "Boring answer, but here it is. Interplay had the license, and they had the resources to do one. The setting and the engine were dictated to us, but of all the licenses that could be dictated to someone at Interplay, it was one of the best, aside from possibly Fallout. In any event, Ferg and Fargo pretty much let us run with it. I think they were more concerned with Black Isle getting Baldur's Gate and Fallout 2 done than worrying too much about Torment." I think this is worth highlighting because in the modern day, AAA game development really feels like a slop factory. Not only are the people involved massively overworked, but their creativity is drained out of them, as they essentially just do what executives want until they either quit, get laid off, or go and make Claire obscure. So it's nice to know that there was a time where just because executives wanted something to happen, it didn't leave developers re-evaluating their life choices. Just like Zeb though, Chris was really looking for a chance to tell a story and create an RPG experience that wasn't about half-naked, heavily muscled barbarians. God, you are beautiful. Rescuing equally ill-attired princesses from evil wizards. Here's a quote from an IGN interview. "The premise behind Torment was solely from a desire to do something different. We had the whole Planescape multiverse to work with, and the last thing we wanted to do was create a standard role-playing game experience. We wanted to turn the RPG experience on its head and hit the player with a horde of new ideas about what an RPG could be about." And this is more or less what led them to starting at the end, with what happens to the player after they die on their quest and get the game over screen. We can find the game's design document online and have a good rummage through it. The game was originally titled Last Rites, and was actually going to be one of several titles that took place in this setting released by Interplay, though for various reasons this was the only one that made it all the way to release. It's a very overly ambitious pitch for sure, and reminds me in a lot of ways of Larian's first design documents for their cancelled games Ragnarok Unless and The Lady, the Mage and the Knight. These are basically the overreaching goals of amateur game designers who haven't actually produced a product yet, but are absolutely sure they can do it better than everyone else. It makes sense for the as yet untested Larian Studios back in the day to be pitching a game offering degrees of reactivity and realism that we still can't achieve in games today, but not quite so much for these guys working for Interplay. Still, there's nothing wrong with aiming high, I guess. The document outlines a lot of the story, or as they call it, the fucking plot. Especially concerning the protagonist, his status as an immortal with amnesia, and his mission to recover the memories he's lost and find out who's trying to kill him. We also have profiles and artwork for multiple characters, both companions and enemies. The emphasis here is that this is going to be different in all caps. This isn't high fantasy, this is avant-garde fantasy. You aren't going to be trekking through miles of wilderness and cutting down hobgoblins with your swords, while your wizards stay at the back cheering you on because they can only cast 2 spells today. Everything from the story to the world to the characters and how you interact with them is going to be different. What I find especially interesting is all the references to how powerful the player character is going to be and how much violence you'll be able to inflict on everyone around you. You'll be able to rip out someone's soul and order it to murder the body they once inhabited, and perform all kinds of horrific mutilations on people. NPCs would bow and scrape to you as you passed in the streets, for fear of your wrath as your reputation grew. The world was going to be so alive that characters would be doing things while you weren't even around to see what was going on, and you just have to figure it all out when you finally got there. I'm not sure if all of this was really intended to be in the game, or if maybe they were just hoping to impress management with this teenage edgelord crap. The whole document is written like the producers of Itchy and Scratchy read the initial pitch, and then demanded more attitude.
No, he was supposed to have attitude.
It reminds me somewhat of what I was like when I was 17, and not in a good way. Oh, also, babes. The document promises, and I quote, babes, as in truckloads of. Tons of total babes. This game will have lots of babes that make the players go, wow. There will be fiendish babes, human babes, angelic babes, Asian babes, and even undead babes. These babes will be present without nipplage, and will all regrettably behave within the TSR Code of Ethics. Which is a pretty bold claim considering the powers of the graphics engine at the time. So, 2 points here. First, what is the TSR Code of Ethics? This may be news to some but not many, but Dungeons Dragons was once at the centre of its own version of the Satanic Panic. You see, certain sects of the Christian faith are far less interested in spreading love, charity and compassion, and promoting their faith in the most positive way possible, than they are keeping their members absolutely terrified of everything outside of their insular communities in order to maintain a stranglehold on their power over said communities. This grift requires a constant string of new boogeymen for them to blame their problems on, though the regular boogeymen, and boogie women for that matter, work just as well. So they decided that groups of socially awkward teenagers who didn't like sports, creating a collective fantasy world together as a way of socializing, was somehow warping their minds and even connected to worshipping or invoking the devil. By Newton's luscious locks, I just can't even with these people. How does anyone take them seriously at all? At least with Doom it kind of made sense, and those guys were actively encouraging it for the free press. So this absurd idea reached such mainstream recognition that we even got a whole ass novel and Tom Hanks movie called Mazes and Monsters in 1982, and this actually caused some problems for TSR and led to them doing some rebranding. The TSR Code of Ethics were a set of rules baked into the writing of official Dungeons & Dragons products at the time that stated things like, in a good versus evil conflict, evil should never be looked upon as favourable. Authority figures like law enforcement should never be challenged. Can't imagine who'd think that was a good idea. And while it was certainly fine to display women in seductive clothing, sex was something that happened off-screen when no one was looking. Which is funny because if you played this game, you know it more or less breaks every rule on the list. Secondly, I just want to add that this is fucking cringe. Don't get me wrong, I love babes. I love babes in my games too. I like this babe, love this babe. And I have not talked to my parents about this yet actually. And look, I can see a sense of humour at play here. We all know what those first Fallouts and most of Obsidian's games are like, right? But this really speaks to the attitude of game development back then and who they considered their target audience. Still, the final game we got, while it certainly does include some babes, and there are some pretty amazing spells, some of which get their own pre-rendered cutscenes, a lot of this action-loaded power fantasy is nowhere to be found. Because this is a game where you spend most of your time talking to people and reading a lot of text. The story we get remains consistent with the initial pitch, and the characters we are introduced to here show up too. You may think that's nothing special, but it kind of is. In general, the game you start out making is rarely the one you release. For all kinds of reasons, stories, mechanics and settings can lurch off into directions that no one imagined, and if what they find there is fun, well, the team may just want to stay there. Still, this is the late 90s, and development cycles and team sizes were shorter and smaller, and Interplay wanted another isometric CRPG set in the plains to piggyback off the success of Baldur's Gate, so I guess there was only so far it could stray from the initial idea. Sometimes, limitations are good. Anyway, we aren't exactly done with this design document or interviews with our developers yet, but for now, let's head back to the Hive, link up with our Nameless avatar and Mort, do a little exploring, and meet a few people. The Hive is where we begin our exploration of the plains, and the best word I can think to describe it is dense. Divided into 4 main areas from northeast to southwest, and connected through the centre by the Alley of Dangerous Angles, the Hive is the slum of Sigil. It is the domain of the Dustmen who pay for corpses, and is infrequently visited by anything resembling authority in this realm. This means you're just as likely to wind up shanked and your body sold off for jink, as you are to be bought a drink in the Smouldering Corpse bar. There are a lot of people to talk to in this opening area, both outside and in the Gathering Dust bar not far from Mortuary. While you'll learn quickly that NPCs with generic names don't have much to offer beyond stock lines, you are going to find tons of named NPCs who have stories and lore to share, and a metric fuckton of side quests for you to get involved in. On top of that, there are multiple ways to get the information you need on Farod, and to go looking for him too. Now, a little habit I've picked up from Bethesda open world RPGs is following the critical path hard for the first few hours, as a way of getting all the best starting gear. I don't recommend you take this route at all in this game, as you'll be overwhelmed and back on that slab in Mortuary all too quickly. Instead, I recommend you go exploring, especially in the Smouldering Corpse bar, because that's where you're going to meet your first companion. We are also going to learn all about the Dustmen, and even have the opportunity to join them if we want. But before we do any of that, can we just enjoy the spectacle of this place for a moment? Similar to its name and status, the Hive feels like a polluted industrial town. The place is covered in dirt and rust, and everything is just adorned with spikes. This visual spectacle is powered by BioWare's Infinity engine. This used pre-rendered backgrounds, similar to what many other great late 90s and early 2000s titles used, as well as a few other tricks to get the best visuals out of the limited hardware power at the time. I've gushed about pre-rendered backgrounds many times before, so if you want to know a little more about the technical side, then take a look at my video on the first 2 Siberia games. One big problem with them though is the added steps they bring about to iteration. With a tile-based system, like most sprite-based games of the day had, and 3D models like we have now, things can be changed and updated in-engine and immediately tested to see how they look. However, changing the layout or camera placement in an environment using pre-rendered backgrounds means going through the trouble of editing the map in an external 3D program, and re-rendering it, something I'm guessing wasn't a quick process back then, and then updating all your collision geometry and setting up the new backgrounds in the game engine. Now, imagine going through all that, only to think that a plant really needs to be just a little more to the left. A few other features of this engine are global lighting that allows for periods of day and night, and areas of dynamic lighting that would affect the character sprites. While Planescape does use 2D sprites, we can see full 3D models of the characters in the Nameless One's journal. The remastered version has very smooth animations, and given I was also playing the OG Baldur's Gate not so long ago, I can say hands down, this game looks way better than that one. So there are several important points in this opening section. The first is that even though we may be done with our past life, it is far from done with us. We actually meet people who recognize us, if only in passing. After all, how could a man this scarred and his floating skull really not stand out? Next, we are going to meet our first Dabus and learn a little about the Lady of Pain. Probably the most interesting thing about the Lady of Pain is just how little anyone actually knows about her, and that includes her creator, Mr. Zeb. She isn't a goddess, and she does not take kindly to being worshipped. Something I decided to test and got to see the results of myself at one point in the game. The Lady does not abide gods in her realm, and has the power to keep them out. They may send their worshippers to Sigil, and even this early in the game, we will meet powerful denizens of the lower planes here too, just hanging out and having a drink. Her only underlings are the Dabus, who are workers tasked with constantly remodeling Sigil based on some design known only to her. They float above the ground and do not speak with voices, but with strange glyphs that float above their heads and communicate meaning. One mechanic that's very useful here is the ability to call forth memories from the Nameless One's past life. This will happen all through your adventure, and give you a small insight into numerous lives the Nameless One has led, and various impacts these lives have had on the people and the world around him, as well as being able to call forth knowledge and skills he acquired during those lives. In this case, looking upon the language of the Dabus stirred the memory, and thanks to my stats, I was able to bring it forward and gain access to the language. It's also possible to have other characters interpret for you, but they may not be entirely honest about what they're reading, depending on who you ask. Still, the Dabus are just as mysterious as the Lady of Pain herself. They seem to be creatures of singular purpose. They perform their tasks regardless of whether that means you're losing your house or your shop, and you do well to let them do it lest you bring down the Lady's wrath. While a swift and horrible death is absolutely within her powers to grant you, it's just as likely that you'll be mazed for your troubles. That is to say, you'll be hurled into a pocket dimension that is actually a near unsolvable labyrinth. Well, the one we get sent to isn't all that challenging, but whatever. For the most part, you'll be left to wander this place for all time, or until your biological clock gives up. Either way, you are no longer a problem for the Lady. A little later on, we will enter the Alley of Dangerous Angles, and deal with a turf war between two gangs collecting tolls there. We can also meet Aola in a ruined temple, and will actually have to in order to deal with a very interesting side quest that gets thrust upon us when we unwittingly agree to return a box to its original owner. Aola is a priest of Auskar, one of the very few that we'll find in Sigil on account of worshipping this god being a fast track to being mazed or suffering a gruesome death at the hands of the Lady. Auskar was a self-proclaimed deity of portals who set up shop in Sigil. This is on account of Sigil's central position and the fact it is absolutely riddled with portals to other planes. Since the Lady can't abide any divine infringement on the neutrality of Sigil, she took matters into her own hands and destroyed Auskar. Since we're dealing with that level of power here, it makes sense that she's much more of a background figure in this story. While a more traditional RPG would probably see her confronting you at some point, Planescape isn't focused on you in that way. The Lady was here before you, and she'll be around long after even you have gone. The appeal really does lie in her less is more design though. While she has appeared in other tabletop adventures, and even plays a role in them, she is profound by her absence. She's a mystery to us, just as much as to everyone else in Sigil, and the fact we don't even come close to unraveling any of it during our time here lets our imaginations run off in all kinds of directions with her story. So, from a Dabus to a bar, let's check out the Gathering Dust Bar and learn a little more about the Dustmen. The idea behind the various factions in the Planescape setting was to explore some of the extreme places that certain ideologies and philosophies can lead us to, or at the very least some of the tangents they can go down. The first faction we encounter on account of us waking up in their base of operations is the Dustmen. We'll learn a lot about them early on from Dahl, but we get to know more about them by interacting with them in their downtime. It seems even with all the zombies that they have available to do the heavy lifting, the Dustmen need a little time to unwind and have a drink at the end of a shift. The Dustmen believe that life, the gods, even the journey of the soul after it departs the body, is all an illusion. This illusion serves to keep people attached to their existence and denies them the peaceful oblivion of the true death. Their beliefs say this true death is achieved only when one has relinquished all attachments and truly accepted the impermanence of life. It sounds an awful lot like Buddhism in that regard, and while meditating on death to accept its inevitability is part of the Buddhist path to enlightenment, these workers in their sack robes with their zombies to do the heavy lifting don't exactly resemble ascetic monks working towards inner peace. When you converse with Dahl in Mortuary, We notice he's coughing a lot and likely not long for this world given his appearance. Still, he refuses any offer of help and says he's very much ready for the release of the true death. It would seem he's relinquished his attachment to this life in all ways but the physical at this point. While it doesn't really come across in the Dustmen, I think there is great beauty in this view of existence. If you truly accept in your heart that one day you will be utterly gone, not just your body while your soul hangs out in paradise, but actually completely gone, you can find beauty and gratitude in every single moment you have. And this is how one can really live each day as if it were their last, and not grasp onto anything, but let all things flow through their existence with all its marvelous changes as they do. That being said, adopting this belief and dedicating yourself to dealing with corpses and essentially a life of work in the slums of Sigil doesn't make it seem like the Dustmen are living their best lives through this ideology. One interesting thing we learn is that the worker zombies are actually contracted into their positions. People, including the player character for that matter, are quite welcome to sign a dead contract with the Dustmen. This essentially sells their corpse to the Dustmen in exchange for money now. Rather than being fed to the crematorium, these corpses are kept in storage until new workers are needed, and then animated via necromancy to be returned to the workforce. Given the Dustmen have both skeletons and zombies in their service, and we see evidence of these things being held together with the Sigil equivalent of duct tape at times, these bodies must be working for a very, very long time. The Dustmen insist, however, that there is nothing left of the ego that once inhabited the body. To them, their workers are more like flesh golems, constructs of flesh and bone animated by magic and guided by the will of the mage. And hey, if you believe that too, then why not sign away your body to servitude after your death? It's not like you'll notice. Still, we have one side quest about a man who actually signed one of the dead contracts having second thoughts about it, and we also eventually gain the ability to speak with the dead, and discover there's more left in there than we first thought. This becomes especially apparent when we enter the Dead Nation. Deep below Sigil's hive, beneath the piled trash of Ragepicker's Square, and down even further than the trash warrens where Farod, the man we are currently looking for, holds court as king of the corpse collectors, down beneath all that filth and rot, in a place truly forgotten about, we find the Weeping Stone Catacombs. As well as being one of the first dungeons we explore, this ancient crypt is also the site of a vicious turf war taking place between the cranium rats of the Warrens of Thought and the undead of the Dead Nations. Going back to the game's design for a moment, there are 2 points I'd like to talk about here. The first is that rats would actually be dangerous. This is a callback to a trope from the time that usually had the player battling rats as part of the combat tutorial, and this game wasn't exactly where it ended either. The second point is that the undead could be more sympathetic than the living, which, well, that's not that hard to believe. I mean, have you met people? They suck. So, Sigil's rat problem involves an infestation of cranium rats. Individually, these things are about as dangerous as any rat, but as they gather in numbers, their individual minds coalesce into a powerful consciousness capable of magic and psychic powers. They can use language to communicate, and even subterfuge. Given the speed with which rats procreate and mature, and the fact they can survive in pretty much any environment on any diet, these things should probably be considered even more dangerous than the illithids. Within the Warrens of Thought we encounter Many as One, in what is probably one of the creepiest rooms in the whole game. It calls you a murderer as it saw the deaths of its kind through their eyes, and felt its flame diminish just a little with each loss. To appease this monstrosity, we have to travel to the Dead Nations to unearth information regarding the Silent King, who rules over it. You don't actually have to complete this quest or really get involved in the turf war once you've got what you need from this area, so I only really cleared it for the sake of completionism near the end, so hey, enjoy some late game combat. It's pretty sick. The Dead Nations are an independent society of undead that are free from the Dustmen. There are several factions living together, including flesh-eating ghouls, skeletons, and zombies, and they have their own system of laws and even something like a religion. Once you arrive there, you won't be attacked, providing you surrender your weapons and agree to remain among them as a prisoner. Akaste the Ghoul Queen, who would rather eat your face, is disappointed if you comply, but won't rock the boat. Here we can meet Stale Mary, and even learn to speak to the dead from her. She herself has existed for so long, she can no longer remember her past. She is here to take care of the other zombies and the true dead here, and she doesn't approve of the way the Dustmen use them. All of these undead are clearly possessed of far more intelligence and personality than the Dustmen would have us believe, and makes us feel very grateful that we didn't sign one of those dead contracts ourselves. You didn't sign, did you? I like the nuance here though. The Cranium Rats value their existence as much as any sentient being does, while this collective of undead have worked extremely hard to create a peaceful society and, as we can discover, going to some quite extreme lengths to keep it that way. Honestly, the only thing missing from this was a couple of Larian-style existential skeletons.
I mean, if you think about it, we don't have no muscles or flesh on our bones either, so what keeps us together, sort of thing, huh?
Anyway, we've been gawping at the scenery and admiring the politics for a while now, and the Hive is very dangerous. There are a lot of cutters looking to make a quick bit of jink off of a corpse, and while combat is downplayed a lot in this game, it's still a factor. So it may be time to recruit a few friends and learn some better skills. Character creation in Planescape is something that happens all throughout the game, not just when you're putting points into your stats at the start. Your actions and how you choose to complete certain quests will affect both your alignment and what other people both in your party and the world at large think about you. And unless you're happy just beating things to death with your severed arm for the entire game, your class is something that can be changed simply by talking to a trainer and maybe doing a few small side quests. We find the first of these helpful instructors in Rage Picker's Square in the Hive. There's Ratbone, who can teach us about the deft fingers and silent feet we need to become a rogue, and Old Mebeth, who... well, she claims she's a midwife and potion mixer, but let's just say she is far more than what she seems at the start. While I refer to these people as trainers, they aren't so much going to be teaching us new skills, as they are stirring up the memories of skills we once possessed within us. Having lived countless lives, the Nameless one has unraveled the mysteries of many arts and powers. As such, our teachers really only serve to give our ruined mind a jolt and let those memories rise to the surface. From then on, it's just a matter of time and experience for more and more to come back to us. Old Mebeth basically sends us on a series of seemingly mundane quests that hide Mr. Miyagi-style lessons about the art inside them. When all these are finished, she takes the mundane items we've returned to her as part of said quests and crafts them into a spellbook for us. At which point, congratulations, you are no longer a useless fighter. You have actually become an even more useless fighter, who can fire off about 2 spells a day that can do some moderate amount of damage to your enemies before it's time for you to hide behind your allies until you've had time for some beauty sleep. And if it wasn't obvious from the line I just said, I'll just say it straight up. I am not a fan of how Planescape and D&D in general handles magic. And I especially don't think it holds up in these old video games where battle frequency and intensity can sometimes feel like Diablo. For those that haven't actually played D&D on the tabletop, you need to know that combat really isn't that frequent. Let's jump over to Baldur's Gate and take a look at something here. So, imagine you and your bros are trekking to their next quest location, and the GM says, you get attacked by a group of hobgoblins, or whatever trash mob he feels like throwing at you. Naturally, the party will leap into action, swords will be drawn, fireballs prepared, and potions drunk before all hell breaks loose, and we get to arguing over rules for about an hour. But when the dust has settled, the heroes are triumphant, wounds are cured, bodies looted, and everyone goes back on their merry way. Now imagine if that GM immediately says, a couple of hours later, an identical band of hobgoblins attacks you. I think there would be more than a few raised eyebrows and necks being craned to see if the GM actually had a full evening's worth of game prepared, or if he'd scribbled a few notes on a receipt paper while on the bus over, and decided that was going to be enough to just wing it for the night. Yes, that actually happened to me once. So, while low-level wizards in the tabletop game may only have a few simple spells to sling per day, it's unlikely they'll be facing the hordes of the Diablo endgame with just 2 cantrips available. The other side of this is that combat XP is significantly higher in the tabletop game, to account for the fact that players will be spending a lot of their resources on each battle. So in heavy combat games, all characters would be leveling up pretty damn fast. However, both Planescape and original Baldur's Gate drastically increase the number of battles you'll be involved in per day, decrease the XP to almost nothing to offset this, and yet keep low-level wizards with a cripplingly low daily spell allowance, instead of implementing some kind of between encounters cooldown system, or something like MP or mana that we can replenish with consumable items. Nope, they have to prepare them before they go to bed. The argument I see a lot is that wizards are underpowered at low levels because they're so overpowered at high levels. So here I am, near the end of the game, cutting loose with my spells and absolutely loving it. The animations for these had their own team, and really live up to the way magic was described in the design document. So yeah, it's fun, but this isn't how balancing works. And make no mistake, the amount of battles in the late game compared to the spell allotment still makes you significantly weaker than a good fighter. Then there's the fact that spells, a limited resource to begin with, can be interrupted during casting and lost. Oh, and let's not forget those saving throws that can negate half or even all of the effects of a spell, making them even less useful. Even so, if you can do next to nothing at level 1, and literally wish the whole adventure to be solved at level 20, that isn't balanced. Balance is making every class equally viable and useful from start to finish. So overall, I don't think this is a good system, even in the tabletop game, and it certainly fails in a video game. Cooldowns and MP systems are significantly better. Planescape's saving grace over Baldur's Gate is that the combat is seriously downplayed, and most of the adventure unfolds through dialogue trees where those high mental and social stats will do you a great service. Which is good because it's not just the magic here that's an issue. Combat in this game also just sucks. I'm not against real-time with active pause combat exactly. I think the versions we get of it in Knights of the Old Republic and Dragon Age are greatly improved from what we have here. I especially like KOTOR's action queuing system, but this is where it all started, and I mean, just look at it. What else do I really have to say? It's boring, and I'm not really doing anything. It isn't especially tactical, and it doesn't look especially heroic either, does it? There are 2 dungeons in the late game that are basically there to appease the combat grinders who are playing this. One of them does have its own interesting story and playable character to find, but it is literally a labyrinth of identical chambers with either 1, 2, or 3 of the same enemy inside. And again, imagine that playing out on a tabletop game. How long would it take for your players to rebel and forcibly derail the adventure, or just go home? Sure, there's story reasons it's like this, but that doesn't change the fact it's boring and bleeds your magic characters of useful spells really quickly. So overall, I'm not a fan of this combat either. And while I doubt the game would ever have gotten a green light without it, it would have been a lot better if they just hadn't bothered. So with all that out of the way, I think it's time I stop blueballing you and give you all what you're really here for. Sure, it's nice to talk about the setting, the engine, and the development of this game, and all of it contributes to what makes it so unique and interesting, and a true artifact of its time. But in the end, we are here for the story and the characters. So let's get into discussing them, and that means spoilers. A lot of spoilers. So an elderly man was sitting alone on a dark path, right? He wasn't certain of which direction to go, and he'd forgotten both where he was travelling to, and who he was. He'd sat down for a moment to rest his weary legs and suddenly looked up to see an elderly woman before him. She grinned toothlessly, and with a cackle spoke. "Now your third wish. What will it be?" Third wish? The man was baffled. How can it be a third wish if I haven't had a first and second wish? "You'd had 2 wishes already," the hag said. "But your second wish was for me to return everything to the way it was before you made your first wish. That is why you remember nothing, because everything is the way it was before you made any wishes." She cackled at the poor Burke. "So it is that you have 1 wish left." "All right," said the man. "I don't believe any of this, but there's no harm in wishing. I wish to know who I am." "Funny," said the old woman as she granted his wish and disappeared forever. "That was your first wish." What can change the nature of a man? The idea of truly knowing oneself is a huge part of Planescape Torment. It's presented in the Nameless One's quest to discover his forgotten past. It's a fundamental part of the philosophy of Zerthamon and the Githzari warrior whom we travel with. Yes, that kind of Gith. It affects even some of the locations we visit at one point, as too much chaos causes a neutral plane to drift into and merge with a chaotic one and unleash all manner of horrors upon the residents there. This may also account for the Lady of Pain's strict no gods policy as a way to keep Sigil and the Outlands truly neutral. Knowing yourself forms the core of many of the relationships we forge in this game and leads to a powerful confrontation with the ghosts of our past lives. And as for that riddle, what can change the nature of a man? It is a challenge issued from a powerful night hag to those who petitioned her for aid, and an answer that did not satisfy her could lead to horrific consequences. So beyond the walls of Mortuary and the dangers of the Hive, beneath the waste and garbage of Ragepicker Square, we find the Buried Village. This forgotten place has long since been built over by the Dabbus, and now serves as home and court to the king of the corpse collectors, Farod. Everything about this man seems crafted to invoke utter disgust in all who lay eyes upon him. His description reads thus. Before you is an elderly man leaning heavily upon a crutch. His left leg is twisted as if he tried to walk in two directions at once and paid the price. His maggoty-coloured skin is bunched heavily upon his skull and is flecked with liver spots. He is mumbling and smacking his lips as his eyes make a circuit of the room. When engaging with this husk of a man, there is a desire to show as little of your hand as possible. His calculating stare tells us that to surrender even an inch to him could cost us dearly. Yet we have no choice but to place ourselves at his mercy. He claims to know something of our past and our condition, but his price for this is sending us beneath the village to the Weeping Stone Crypts to retrieve a bronze sphere for him. This is where we have to contend with the likes of Many as One and the Dead Nations, but we eventually arrive at a strange tomb that is loaded with booby traps.
Like this. Feels like I've been through a shredder.
And messages that seem to have been written by ourselves. While we are eventually successful in this venture, Farod confesses that he has little to teach us, save that we once commissioned him, somewhat forcefully, to have his people take care of our body should they happen upon it from time to time. He instead directs us to his daughter, a tiefling girl named Anna, who apparently found our body this time. Perhaps she knows what became of our missing journal, or perhaps visiting the place of our death will shed some light on our situation. In keeping with the bizarre nature of this world, the alley that we died in is both alive and witnessed our death at the hands of enraged shades of some sort. We also have to help this thing to give birth to itself. Yeah, it's preparing to change itself, but it seems the Dabbus in the area is holding up the process by constantly fixing things. However, once we help this thing, we can truly escape the Hive and explore more of Sigil. It is in the lower ward of Sigil that events conspire to land us in the presence of Lothar. This wizard is one of the few people who can actually bring down a game over screen on the player, as in he can actually kill the Nameless One. He was designed to be beyond the Nameless One at any level, save possibly after recovering all his memories, but he is unkillable and, like Farod, is going to make us jump through some hoops for him. Still, appeasing him allows us to ask the old and wise being why we are immortal. To this question he will tell us that the night hag, Ravel Puzzlewell, separated us from our soul. He uses the word soul tentatively, as he is clearly explaining something more complicated to someone he considers less educated. But the gist is, something vital was cut away from us, and the only way for us to be free of our immortality and the cycle of forgetting our past lives is to be reunited with it. And with that, it may be time for us to put the brakes on this part of the story and travel all the way back to the beginning. So what can change the nature of a man? Regret. At least that's what the first incarnation of the Nameless One believed. Ravel Puzzlewell is a night hag, and a very powerful one at that. The lower ward of Sigil contains countless portals to the lower planes that play host to the devils and demons and the battlegrounds of their eternal blood war. These are all sealed up by the will of the Lady, lest this eternal conflict spill over into her realm and affect the neutral status of Sigil and knock it from its position at the heart of the Outlands. Ravel opened these gates and flooded the streets with death. The days of chaos that followed ended promptly when the Lady brought down her wrath upon the invaders and imprisoned Ravel in an inescapable maze. In the D&D lore, hags delight in suffering and are more than happy to deal with mortals, if only to see them brought to ruin as a result of their own actions. Baldur's Gate 3 fans have no doubt witnessed the kind of power Auntie Ethel wields, and the horrors she's willing to inflict on others with it. While devils use deals to entrap the souls of mortals, something that can be used as a currency and help them gain status in their home plane, hags are not motivated by such goals. They simply love sticking their old noses into others' affairs and inflicting their spite upon them. Ravel, however, she's a little different. Ravel was envisioned as a cryptic puzzle maker who didn't exactly wish to inflict harm on those she dealt with. She is comprised of evil as a denizen of the lower planes, but her motivations aren't exactly wicked. In the case of opening all the portals in the lower ward, she had developed a fixation on the Lady of Pain. She believed that Sigil, sometimes called the Cage, was actually a prison into which she had been bound, and that by tipping the balance she could free the lady from her bondage. In the design document it says that while Ravel's reputation will proceed as terrifying and wicked, Ravel is tremendously powerful but slow to anger. The player's main challenge will be finding a way to politely fend off her lustful advances while picking her brain for information. So, long ago, a night hag loved a man who was full of fire and passion like no other, a man who committed so much evil and harmed so many, only to see the error of his ways later in life. Through his change, he felt so much regret that he could build an entire fortress from it. This man was also filled with fear for the end of his life and the endless blood war that awaited him in the lower planes upon his passing. While he had done all he could to turn his life around, he knew that he could never in a single lifetime, or maybe 100 lifetimes, atone for all the wrongs he had committed. It was this wretch that approached the night hag for help, for a little bird had told him that Ravel Puzzlewell, greatest of all the hags, could make him immortal. It takes some work for the Nameless One to access Ravel's maze. These things are just as hard to break into as they are to escape, it seems. Leaving Sigil for this place marks a significant turning point in the game, and we won't be returning here for a long time. Rather, we will be exploring the Betrayer world of Cursed, and even venturing down into hell itself. I wonder if we'll meet Karlach. Oh God, woman, wrap me in your arms and incinerate me with your heart. Ravel looks old beyond measure, and her mind seems to be slowly failing her. Time has stolen her memories, and she knows not why the Nameless One petitioned her for immortality, or even the method by which she granted his wish. Still, her most significant words are that she only created the way for him, and that she would never inflict the agony she saw him endure upon another person again. Coming from a night hag, that's a hell of a statement. The Nameless One says that he feels a hollowness inside him, a void where something was carved out, which brings us back around to something I was talking about earlier with the Dustmen. That to truly embrace the impermanence of everything, and accept that you will one day vanish for good, is to truly find beauty and peace in every moment of life. Think of everything you do on a daily basis right now, from something unpleasant like getting up to go to work, or mundane like enjoying a cup of coffee, or as profound as playing with your kids and seeing them filled with joy. One day, you will do all of those things for the last time, and you have no idea when that will be. Think about all the last times you've already had. Do your friends still come knocking on your door to ask if you can come out anymore? When did that stop? Who agreed to it? Now, I understand how you could easily think about this and be overwhelmed with cynicism and despair. My crippling coffee addiction certainly rages at the idea of a last cup of coffee, and it may be tempting to just resist thinking about this stuff because it makes you uncomfortable. But if you can accept this simple truth, in every moment you spend with those you love, or in your time spent gaming, creating something artistic, or just enjoying a sunset, you may just find yourself appreciating that, against all odds, you are here to appreciate any of this at all. You might stop worrying about a future you can't control, and simply appreciate the moments you have now, and maybe your capacity for empathy would want to contribute positively to the moments everyone else is experiencing, leading you to choose to smile rather than frown at the people you pass in the street, regardless of their race, gender, choice of clothes, or what other people have told you to think about them. We may have all kinds of differences, but in the end, we're all just stumbling through this life, trying to make the best of it. When the Nameless One had his mortality taken from him, he lost something and became incomplete. The vibrant colours bled out of the world, leaving it dull and desaturated, and when Ravel killed him to test her handiwork, she realised the mistake she had made. The Nameless One rose without his memories, and the price of his resurrection was the death of another. If you want more of that plot hook, by the way, read these books. The essence of this one who was cheated of their life rises as a vengeful shadow, and tries to hunt and kill him, though in succeeding they only add to the number of their own legions. Thousands of lifetimes have passed, each a series of events and encounters and companions that shaped a new version of the Nameless One. It seems somewhat like the personality shifts Doctor Who undergoes when he regenerates. While he's always the same person, each incarnation alters the strength of different personality traits, creating something of a unique ego. It's just that in our protagonist's case, he also has a hard reset on memory, making nothing consistent about each version of him. He could be a kind and gentle man, a total sociopath, or completely mad. Of all his lives though, the most important one he has ever lived, save perhaps his first, is the one we control now. But there are two others who are very significant. And it's the trail of ruin they left behind them that we constantly find ourselves stumbling into on our journey. Painted beneath the uncountable scars on his body, the Nameless One has many tattoos, and we can actually add to this impressive mural at Fel's tattoo parlor. This is the closest we ever really get to equipping armor on our immortal protagonist, who seems quite happy with his "let me solo her" getup. Fel is quite fascinating, as not only does he no longer serve the Lady, but he's actually a priest of Auskar, the god of portals, and openly flaunting this faith is a fast track to being murdered or mazed by the Lady. Fel walks on the ground rather than floating in the sky like the other Dabus, and keeps a collection of the Nameless One's old skins stretched out in a kind of morbid gallery of his work at the back of his shop. Throughout your journey, we can find parts of our body that we discarded and either replaced or allowed to regenerate. Some of these actually contain old tattoos that we can have reapplied to us if we want their bonuses. However, the most important of these is the symbol of torment tattooed on our left shoulder. Just as Dar predicted and warned him he would, the Nameless One gathers to him a collection of souls, each of whom seems to carry the weight of their own great burdens. His pain and the mark of torment calls others to walk his path with him, and while they may not admit to it straight away, it's not exactly the first time for some of these guys. Dakon, Mort, and Vaylor are something of a set in this regard, though I must confess to knowing very little about Vaylor beyond what I read about him. I didn't recruit him during my playthrough as I didn't want to lose any of my current team at the time, so I won't be saying too much about him. Mort, we already know, is with us when we wake up in Mortuary, and he claims he's a floating encyclopedia here to help the Nameless One. Dakon is someone we encounter in the Smouldering Corpse bar in the Hive. I actually recommend running south out of Mortuary and recruiting this guy straight away, as he's a very capable fighter and makes dealing with all the jink-hungry thugs in the Hive and some of those early combat areas a lot easier. He's a Githzari. Sometime after the Gith liberated themselves from the Illithids, they had their first civil war thanks to a religious leader named Zerthamon. After much blood was spilt, the Githyanki went to the astral plane where they became marauders and raiders, while the Githzari went to Limbo where they became something akin to warrior monks. About the only thing these two have in common now is their hatred for mind flayers, but the Illithids have agents that keep them at odds with each other rather than uniting against them. Those who follow the way of Zerthamon closely are known as Zerths, and their power is in knowing oneself. Another idea taken from Zen. Knowing is crucially important in the plane of Limbo, where doubting that the ground is beneath your feet can lead to it simply not being there. The word know carries incredible weight and nuance in their language and society. Dakon was once a powerful Zerth leader who lost his way. He wields a Zerth blade that can be shaped by his will, and could, in theory, slay a god if the wielder were possessed of such mental fortitude. Dakon's will was used to reinforce the walls and defenses of his city, but when he began to doubt the teachings of Zerthamon, those same walls weakened and his home fell to an invasion. By some miraculous chance though, as Dakon lay defeated and dying, a scarred figure arrived just in time to save him and give him a gift. An unbroken circle of Zerthamon, a sign, something to reinvigorate his faith. For this, Dakon was oathbound to walk the stranger's path until one of them died, but by some cruel twist, it would seem that death was only a minor inconvenience to this mysterious savior. If this had been intentional, it would be a hell of a dick move. While Mort is very charming in his own way, with his constant sass and attraction to the many zombies we encounter, he's more than just a pretty face. He actually has some of the most broken abilities in the game. Litany of Curses, aka Mort insults the enemy in a creative way, both provokes enemies and damages their morale. This means even magically powered enemies will forget their common sense and rush at Mort to hit him if he lets fly with a torrent of abuse. It can also be spammed as often as you want with no cooldown or limit on how many enemies can be pulled, and gets stronger every time Mort happens to hear new curse words and insults.
New taunts, alright!
I know of only one other man whose capacity for speech carries so much power, but that is a tale for another time. While it's easy to suspect Mort is holding out on us, we get a big hint in a tomb that we find deep beneath the Hive. Once we've navigated a series of lethal booby traps in this place, we actually come to realise that we are the ones who made it, and it seems to be for us. Around the central chamber, we find writings etched into the stone that are the words of an immortal trying to puzzle out his existence. He speaks of balancing the books for some kind of horrific crimes, and wonders if he can even be considered responsible for any of these anymore. Which is a hell of a question, really. Is one set of memories guilty of the crimes of another just because they share the same body? Is the oblivion of these memories equal to a death penalty of sorts that renders the new incarnation free of the stains of those past sins? Is there any reason to think of two incarnations as the same person and not just as different people who look kinda similar? One of these etchings is actually the original instructions that are tattooed on our backs. Since it was Mort who read them to us in the first place, this is actually our first chance to read them ourselves, and right at the bottom we find the words, "Don't trust the skull." Our next player that we should introduce here is Falls from Grace. While Grace's history isn't connected to our tormented hero's past like Mort and Dakon, she is a very interesting character and is instrumental in uncovering what Mort is holding back. Like just about everything else in this world, Grace is a total subversion of all expectations. Voiced by Jennifer Hale, who also voices Dayanara, and is quite possibly the voice of many a 90s kid's wet dreams, being the voice of multiple iconic game and animation characters, Grace is a succubus from the abyss. Despite being composed of chaos and evil though, she is lawful neutral. Despite being a cleric, she has no patron deity, and despite being a sex demon, she dresses conservatively and has no interest in corrupting the souls of mortals. She does run a brothel, however. Aha, so it was a scam all along. That slates intellectual lusts. This could be a desire to debate a competent interlocutor, play a strategy game with them, exchange all manner of stories and tales, and even furiously slinging insults at each other. The girls here are from a variety of races, including an actual snakehead Gorgon. Honestly, this one section is probably worthy of an entire video for itself, and the music is just divine. Grace is a sensate. This is another of the factions we encounter and can join here. They are on a spiritual mission to experience all that the planes have to offer. One of their tools are sensory stones that contain intense memories that can be fully experienced by those who interact with them. It's basically a fantasy version of a brain dance from Cyberpunk or SimStim from Shadowrun. We actually find a sensory stone containing the memory of someone who was, let's just say, in the care of Ravel Puzzlewell for a time, and entering this memory is one of the ways we can communicate with her before we meet her. Grace was sold, by her mother no less, to the Bartazoo of the Nine Hells, to be used as a plaything by them. She eventually won her freedom from them though, so she is somewhat uniquely positioned as a Tanari demon and a former resident of Hell to tell the Nameless One that Mort stinks of the pit. On Avernus, the first layer of Hell, is a pillar made of 1,000 chattering skulls. The fate of all those who deceive others into death is to be placed upon this pillar, where their minds merge into a massive noise, wickedness, and regret. Farod, our resident Collector King, has actually known for some time that he is destined to join these skulls, but was assured by someone that a bronze sphere would somehow spare him from this fate. This massive hive mind knows many things that are long forgotten from time long ago, so when a scarred stranger approached it, looking to find a portal to a place called the Fortress of Regret, something like recognition stirred in one of the skulls. For just a moment, it stopped being a part of the gibbering mass and became an individual again. It pleaded that it alone could guide the Nameless One to this place, if only he would pull him from the pillar and free him from his torment. And while Mort has his own selfish reasons to escape this eternal damnation, and even remain with the Nameless One, there is something else to this. Inside his bone box is a great deal of regret. While Mort does not know exactly who he was in life, or the true nature of the crime that saw him placed upon the pillar, he is almost certain that it was he who told the first incarnation that Ravel Puzzlewell could make him immortal, that he knew all too well that things would not go smoothly, and ultimately begin this whole horrific cycle in the first place. Once freed from the pillar, Mort immediately lost his memories of the collective mind, but opted to forget to tell that to his benefactor before they left hell. When Mort finally confesses all of this, it awakens memories inside us, memories of a much crueler, less forgiving incarnation, enacting his own wrath upon Mort, once again leading to some interesting questions about guilt and responsibility. Does our incarnation really bear the guilt for a self he barely remembers and had no control over? In truth, what we think of as ourselves is a fairly flimsy illusion at best. It's a collection of mostly incorrect memories with vast swathes of our life experience forgotten entirely. We have opinions and points of view based on our education and life experiences, but all of this is coloured by what came before. Then there's what other people tell us about ourselves, and maybe some half-baked attempts at self-reflection or spiritual growth. While I think it's safe to say that all of us are different from who we were 30 or even 20 years ago, if you're younger than that, what are you even doing here? There is at least a half-remembered continuum of events and experiences that brought us from there to here. So we can at least feel responsible for the mistakes of our younger selves, even knowing those mistakes were mostly rooted in a lack of experience, impulsiveness, and the general youthful misconception that we're invincible and there's no way we could make the same mistakes our parents made. But if you lose your entire mental history and start again, are you even the same person? Is there any reason to assume you'd appreciate the same things in one incarnation that you did in another? Is there something more fundamental to the self than just memories? It's a hell of a lot to think about. Still, whatever the past is, remembered or not, it is beyond control now. All that can be done is to try and live a better life now. In that spirit, I apologize to Mort for my actions. He had been nothing but a good and loyal friend to me since we began our quest. He made some mistakes, sure. We both did. And he was scared, which is understandable. But he stuck by me in the end. And for this incarnation, that's the only Mort I know. While we can learn a lot about our past incarnations through the people who met them, our biggest revelations happen in the Maze of Reflections. This place is a final trap laid for us by our great enemy, and leads to us coming face to face with 3 of our past lives. We first see the Transcendent One in Ravel's maze not long after we seemingly slay her. Feigning death and secretly escaping is a common hag trick when faced with a stronger enemy. So as Ravel lays motionless on the ground, something, we don't know what yet, but it is voiced by the late great elder god Tony J, approaches and demands she stands up.
Arise, crone.
After briefly conversing with Ravel, he sets about finishing the job we started, this time leaving no room for error. If you've really been paying attention to the story, then you've probably already figured out at this point that the Transcendent One is our own mortality. The piece of us that was cut away by Ravel and fled to etch out its own existence free from the rest of us. It eventually found the Fortress of Regret on the negative material plane that exists beyond and cut off from the rest of the planes. This is the place all the vengeful souls who died that we might live gather, for it is our regret from which the fortress is constructed. And it is from here that the Transcendent One sends them out to slay us again whenever we get too close to discovering the truth of things. The way to the negative material plane is a secret known only to this great enemy, a past version of the Nameless One now lost to oblivion, and a fallen angel named Trius. Trius is one of the game's standout enemies, being both powerful and morally grey in his intentions. We find him in the deepest part of the cursed prison, where he remained for a very long time. He incited an insurrection in the Divine Realms, as he believed the angels shouldn't be simply standing on the sidelines of the Blood War, but actively battling the forces of evil there. In this regard, he was an idealist, who maybe saw things in simple black and white, rather than shades of grey. But he is a Deva after all. The nature of such a creature is fundamental to its existence, and opposed to both devils and demons. Does he even have a choice? When Zariel transgressed from her nature, she became an archdevil and now rules over Avernus. So it's not the same for them as it is for mortals. For his transgression, his wings were burnt from his back, and he was sent to rot beneath cursed, with his angelic blade now being used as an energy source by the wardens here. This section is such a slog, by the way, but I've already complained about the combat enough. Trius isn't exactly honest with us about how he came to be imprisoned here when we first meet him, and even sends us on a merry jaunt to meet a devil who is oath-bound to do good until Trius dies, who in turn suggests we ask the Pillar of Skulls how to get to the Fortress of Regret. When the Pillar finally reveals that Trius actually knew where the entrance was all along, we start to understand why he's called Trius the Deceiver. In freeing him from his prison, we condemn Cursed, as he brings his retribution down on the people of this plane, and the chaos he unleashes actually pushes the whole plane into the chaotic realm of Carcery. We have to confront him in order to get the full story out of him, and also balance the alignment of Cursed so it can return to its more neutral status. This is in many ways the final boss of the game, as we don't actually have to fight the Transcendent One to defeat him. While Trius demands we spare his life in exchange for the information we need, we aren't compelled by the game to keep this promise. And when I asked him what he would do next, he said he would once again assemble a host to march on Mount Celestia, because he had no other purpose than to fight and die in battle against them. I told him to go home, seek forgiveness, and accept whatever comes. He actually saw wisdom in my words. While the gods of the plains are finite and imperfect, perhaps they had some plan in motion here all along. But then again, what would they care for the soul of a fool in Sigil? Trius reveals that the portal to the negative material plane can be found in Mortuary, only a matter of meters from where the Nameless One awoke at the start of the game, almost like he'd been trying to reach that place all the way back at the very beginning. How many times have we repeated this cycle? Well, as Mort tells us right before we enter, at least once before. Both he, Dakon, Dayanara, and one other all came this way before, only to become separated once they were through the portal, which is why several members, including ourselves, wound up dead. Still, Mort has hope for this incarnation of us, saying that the last one, who we are going to meet very soon, was too detached, and this version of us has a lot more spirit. Of the various trials that await us in the Fortress of Regret, we will have a showdown with either Ignis or Valor depending on our alignment. Ignis is another of our terrible mistakes come back to haunt us. He was apprenticed to a past incarnation who used great cruelty to instruct young Ignis in the ways of evocation. While Ignis did gain tremendous power, and his fire can actually do permanent damage to the Nameless One, his mind broke. He seemed to merge with the flames, becoming an all-consuming force of chaos that eventually torched a good portion of the Hive. It took a collaboration of many wizards to finally best him, and he was turned into a living conduit to the elemental plane of fire as a kind of ironic punishment. Rather than simply be devoured by the flames though, Ignis seemed to thrive from them, and became the central attraction of the Smouldering Corpse bar for some considerable time, until we release him again. Valor, at least as far as I understand it, was a mercy killer. These are another of Sigil's many extremist factions that operate in pursuit of absolute justice. I think I know a guy who might like them. His fate took a sharp twist when he was chasing a killer beneath Cursed. You'll never guess who. And became imprisoned there. Valor is an exemplar of his kind though, absolutely committed to his cause. His purpose is his whole identity, and he is unrelenting in that. As such, even in death, his essence remains bound into his armor, seemingly unaware that his body has rotted to nothing. He waits to be released. Unfortunately, at the point in the game where we can recruit him, I had a full party, and I wasn't willing to leave any of them behind in Cursed so he could join me. As we explore the Fortress of Regret, we see each of our companions fall at the hands of the Transcendent One. Grace makes a particularly powerful last stand against him. At least one character that we met in the game accuses Grace of being a deceiver, nothing more than a demon playing an elaborate long game to harness the souls of the unfortunate. If we'd ever doubted her before, I don't think we will after this. However, we are forced to fight one of these two, and after we have bested them, the final trap is sprung, and we are imprisoned in the Maze of Reflections, where we are greeted by 3 of our past lives that seem to have been conjured from whatever space in our mind or soul they occupy. These are called the Good Incarnation, the Practical Incarnation, and the Paranoid Incarnation, and it's these last two especially whose footprints we've been stepping through most of the game. Both of these two left us asking serious questions about the lives we led before this one, and quite possibly even inspired us to try to be better this time around. I'm not sure that practical is the correct word for this arrogant piece of crap right here. Maybe the writers didn't want to tell us what to think about him just from his name, but rather let him speak for himself so that we might draw our own conclusions. Also, the sociopathic narcissistic incarnation doesn't roll off the tongue quite as easily as practical. This one probably got closer than any other to actually confronting the Transcendent One and ending the cycle. Viewing the problem with cold logic and using everyone around him as a tool to serve his ends, it was he who tricked Dakon into a life pact. He also took Mort from the Pillar of Skulls. He was the architect of the booby-trapped tomb that was a failed attempt by him to trick his would-be killers before he knew who they were. He wrote the journal that went missing and the tattooed messages on our back. He ultimately assaulted the Fortress of Regret with a party formed of himself, Dakon, Mort, a blind archer, and Dayanara. From the moment we meet her condemned spirit, we knew we had committed some terrible wrong to her, and it's here we learn the full extent of it. In the Clerk's Ward in Sigil, we are able to enter the Sensate's sensorium and experience several memories that have been stored there, and one of them is Dayanara's. This is the memory of a woman completely and madly in love with a man and desperate for some sign that he reciprocates her feelings. As the scene unfolds though, we not only experience Dayanara's memories of this encounter, but unlock our own of the same moment and see what a terrible lie all this is. It's nothing but a calculated deception to achieve one thing: to bind the girl to him and leave her to die in the negative material plane. There, her spirit can spy on their enemy and act as a guide for them upon his return. Of all the various despicable things we see committed by people, angels, and even devils in this game, none made me retch quite like this one. Reading the memory scene was absolutely gut-wrenching for me, but it's the cold and callous way he speaks about her, as if there's nothing wrong with simply using people as tools in this way, and claiming the ends always justify the means, that made me want to crack this guy in his regenerating jaw. Of course, confronting him about this invites only gaslighting. He takes no responsibility for his actions and acts like he was doing the girl a favour by allowing her to die for him. While the paranoid incarnation has more than his fair share of blood on his hands, I can't help but feel pity for him. In fact, he gets brownie points from me just for how he pissed off the practical incarnation. Like everyone who is in some way neurodivergent, this is a man who just needed help. Sigil is not a forgiving world, or one that aids the weak. This one burnt the journal of the practical incarnation, took the tomb's booby traps to another level, he learnt a dead language and then promptly killed his teacher so he would be the only one who knew it, and he wrote his journal in this language before placing it in a dangerously trapped dodecahedron. He was mazed for murdering so many people and remains a rabid dog even now. Our objective in this maze is to convince these three to merge with us, that we might become whole and strong enough to fight our ultimate enemy. If you can't convince one of them to do so, then it comes down to a fight. I had no particular desire to hurt the paranoid incarnation though, even for the harm he'd inflicted on me. Having recalled the secret language though, I was able to convince him that we were one and the same, and that he would be safe if he joined with me. For the practical incarnation, it came down to a battle of wills. He himself was convinced that he should emerge as the dominant ego, as he was the only one willing to do what was necessary. He delivers this like some kind of speech, and sounds like someone who had learned how to give a speech from Wikipedia. Have you seen Nightcrawler, by the way? Good movie. Still, since I'd gone all mental stats anyway, he was easily bested and ultimately yields to me as his better. Which just leaves this guy. The good incarnation was a simple man who lived as a cartographer. He describes his life as long and quiet and filled with the joys and sorrows you'd expect from any life. He was eventually slain on the fields of the upper plains by mysterious shadowy assassins. He is very willing to join with you though, and only asks if the brief life we lived was worth it. Given that one way or another, everything is coming to an end very soon, that is a very profound question to ask, and makes us wonder what wisdom and knowledge this man is withholding from us. Still, we give our answer, and he is gone, with absolutely nothing else to say to us whatsoever, no siree Bob. Unless you have, for some reason, kept a hold of the bronze sphere that Farad asked her to collect for him all the way up to this moment. The practical incarnation actually knows what the bronze sphere is, as it was he who set Farad searching for it. Farad knew he was destined for a spot on the Pillar of Skulls, and we even get a chance to see him there later in the game. The practical shithead had told Farad that the sphere contains a way for him to escape this fate. It does nothing of the sort. It's actually a sensory stone that contains a memory of the first of us. Yes, this guy here was no cartographer. He was the one who set it all in motion all those thousands of years ago. Once you are able to ask him the right questions, his poker face quickly shatters, but he is less than willing to let the other two know about him. He confesses the truth of their origins and why he set up this terrible cycle of constant death in motion. But more importantly, hidden within the sphere is his name. We don't actually discover it. We only know that it is such a simple thing, but in knowing it, we know ourselves, and finally become complete. The symbol of torment peels from our shoulder, for it no longer rules over us. Instead, it can be channeled into probably the most explosive and powerful spell in the game. It's just kind of a shame there are only 2 more challenges for us to overcome before we finish the story once and for all, and one of them is so much more painful than the other. Our final meeting with Dayanara is almost as tragic as our first, for we have no happy tidings to offer her. While we have a chance to release her from her bondage, the key to that is heartbreak. We can tell her the truth of why she was brought here, that the incarnation she loved deceived her and never felt anything for her. And yet, she will ask us in return if we have perhaps grown to love her in this lifetime. I had romanced Anna at that point, and while it pained me to dash this girl's hopes one more time, it was the only way I could be sure she'd go free. She does, however, release us from the maze of reflections before she lets go of this world forever, though not without saying one more thing.
I shall wait for you in death's halls, my love.
The true tragedy here is that whatever the practical incarnation did to her, it worked so well that even in the face of the absolute frank and honest truth of things, she still can't let go of the fiction she built so much of her life and her death around. Those who cross to the afterlife ultimately forget the lives they left behind though, or perhaps the Dustmen have the right of it, and blissful oblivion waits. Whatever the truth of it, I only hope there is some kind of peace for this girl, who has suffered so much. The Transcendent One sort of reminds me of the practical incarnation in some respects. His arrogance certainly does, and the way he acts like our loss is inevitable. All of our companions are now dead at the top of the fortress. Well, not Mort. He's just putting on a good show of it. But now we are almost whole, the power of life and death is ours to command. Of course, as with all people we encounter on our journey, there are questions to ask of this ancient and wretched thing, and when we take our measure of him, we find him severely lacking. Far from being some all-powerful terror incarnate, he is just a coward, hiding behind the walls of his castle and sending others to do the work he is too scared to do himself. He is a shade, an incomplete thing that has somehow imagined it could be any more than a part of the Nameless One. Our last question that we can ask this thing before we must make our final play is, what can change the nature of a man? While the Transcendent One mocks this question, it gives our hero a chance to voice his own answer, and what a beautiful answer it is. If there is anything I have learned in my travels across the plains, it's that many things may change the nature of a man. Whether regret, or love, or revenge, or fear, whatever you believe can change the nature of a man, can. I've seen belief move cities, make men stave off death, and turn an evil hag's heart half-circle. This entire fortress has been constructed from belief. Belief damned a woman whose heart clung to the hope that another loved her when he did not. Once it made a man seek immortality and achieve it. And it has made a posturing spirit think it is something more than just a part of me. From here we have several options. In knowing your name, you can simply zap the creature from existence. Though this is something of an abrupt ending, with very little closure all things considered. You can resurrect at least one ally and engage in a final battle with your nemesis, or use the threat of a weapon forged by a great golem that can slay even an immortal if it is used in a place cut off from the planes. What we might think of as the correct ending, though, sees the Nameless One rejoin with his nemesis and finally embrace the fate that he has been running from all this time. He then resurrects each of his companions in turn, and there is a great goodbye. Since Dakon's oath bound him until either his death or yours, the fact he died ultimately ends your partnership. But he is pleased that you, like he, now truly know yourself at last. And with the tearful goodbyes out of the way, the fate of the Nameless One finally comes to collect him, and he is taken to the lower planes and the Blood War, where he will atone for the countless lives he has taken and mountains of suffering he has made in fire, blood, and brimstone. The final version, though, at least went willingly to his fate. Maybe he was tired, or maybe he just understood what all of this means better than he did before. Maybe he has hope that even though it may take an insurmountable amount of time, he may yet truly atone for his crimes and finally be granted some kind of peace. How is there more? This is already the longest script I've ever written on one single game. It's 2/3 the size of my Shadowrun video, and that was about 3 games. The simple fact is, Planescape is just one of the densest games I've ever played. It isn't even close to being the biggest RPG I've played in terms of story or world, but so much is compacted into this game in terms of philosophy, morality, spirituality, and just casting cool-ass spells. Like, once a day at least anyway. That nothing feels worthy of cutting out. I'd love to just say, hey, the story's great, don't watch a video on it, go and play it. But then, how do I begin tackling the themes or characters without dropping completely random and out of context spoilers? So this last section is just to talk about those things that didn't organically fit into the rest of the script. And I guess we can start with the 2 characters I haven't really talked about up until this point. Anna and Nordum are both characters wrestling with their own identity crises. Anna is the foster daughter of Farod and a tiefling girl. That is to say, she has the blood of the lower planes inside her, though it doesn't really affect her alignment. What does affect her is being raised by an opportunistic criminal in the heart of the Hive and essentially having to learn that life is hard and people will betray you the first opportunity they get for a chance to enrich themselves, even a little. If her father wasn't the perfect example of this, then the majority of the Hive, that stands in the shadow of Mortuary, where you can literally sell dead bodies for jink, regardless of how they wound up that way, has shown her. She joins our party after Farod explains she's the one who found our body in the first place. But unlike the guys I've mentioned already, her life wasn't in any way entangled with our hero's past incarnations. In fact, she is creepily described as a brash girl on the brink of womanhood in her in-game biography, and the design document describes her as a smouldering young tiefling that speaks with an Irish accent. She's brash, insulting, and inexpressibly attracted to the player character. Which I guess goes all the way back to the design document promising all manner of babes, and some other statements in there that imply who their target audience is. Yikes. This doesn't mean that Anna is just there to be a potential romance option for the player. She does have her own distinctive personality and quirks like the others, and she's a very capable thief, but she is also fulfilling part of the power fantasy role of having women fall at your feet despite looking like, well, like this. So from having been raised in such a harsh environment, Anna has built up something like a shell around herself, and is both terrified of letting people see her vulnerable side, while also really needing to let someone get close. The romance in this game is basic, and a bit clumsy at best. You just kinda need to show up and you'll get what you want. You can go after both Anna and Grace, and have them fighting over you, rather than realizing you're actually a total jerk and they'd both be better off without you. I'm not going to complain about this too much though. It is bad, and kinda cringe for sure, but it is what it is, a product of its time. It does hint at some bigger problems that were going on in the industry at the time, but did it destroy my enjoyment of the game? Do I think that all the original fans of this are terrible misogynists who had their minds warped by this video game? Yes, of course I do, and you should all be horrifically ashamed of yourselves. No, not even slightly. There are 2 big moments for Anna, both when we find Farod dead, and later when we visit the Pillar of Skulls, and Farod's head actually emerges to speak to her. While professing no love for her foster father who, in her mind, only saw her as a means to an end, I can't imagine this was an easy thing for her to cope with at all. she also puts up one hell of a fight against the Transcendent One in the Fortress of Regret. Nordum is a Modrum. These are probably one of the most bizarre and interesting races in the game. Constructs have been a feature of D&D forever, of course, though they get a special level of inclusion in the Eberron setting that I really appreciated. Within the great cosmology of Planescape, Mechanicus is a plane of absolute law, and Modrums are these machine-like lifeforms that exist in a collective hive mind, and seem like an entire race of socially awkward kids, trying and failing to mimic natural social interactions, on account of having absolutely zero understanding of why these things work. While we encounter a few of them early on, we can access an entire maze they have created in the plane of Limbo by buying a small toy that looks like one of them. We can, much to Mort's disapproval, take out this toy and wave the arms around and play with it for the sheer fun of doing so. Or we can attempt to unlock its secrets and have ourselves transported into one of the most repetitive and boring areas in the game. It seems like some time ago, the Modrum Collective turned their attention to the puzzle of why do people go on adventures, and we are in fact inside a giant modular maze that they created and filled with constructs to fight, occasional notes telling us that we have learnt something of value, and completely useless so-called treasure to loot. The Modrums seem to think that by running this simulation, they could get to the heart of why people do this, thus completely missing the point in the most spectacular way. Unfortunately, this experiment got derailed when the chaotic forces of Limbo infected the last boss of the game, and he set about rebelling against what he saw as his prison and cut the dungeon off from the larger Modrum hive mind. The Modrum units that remained trapped inside it simply continued doing what they were doing because no one told them to stop. The game had no creative director. More importantly though, this is where we find Nordum. Nordum is a Modrum that's been separated from the hive for so long that he's actually developed something like individuality. He is a defective part and would be immediately purged like an infected limb on his home plane, lest he spread his defect to others. Looking through Reddit, it's quite clear that NordVPN is something of a fan favourite. However, I found the maze so tedious and boring that I didn't bother trying to crack it until after I returned to Sigil from Cursed. I understand how in character it would be for the Modrons to create such a bland dungeon. I mean, we've all seen AI art, right? But that doesn't for a second mean it's something fun to engage with in a video game. If it's meant to be ironic, then there should have been an ironic way to breeze through it. I essentially waited until I was well above the level required to obliterate more or less everything, and recruited this guy then. I certainly got a taste of his little quirks. His mind is somewhat like that of a child. He has lived with a very narrow worldview for a long time, and has not had to make any decisions for himself. He's now being exposed to all kinds of new things and ideas, and is routinely messing up what they're all about. He reminds me somewhat of Quina from Final Fantasy IX in that respect. He simultaneously embraces his new individuality, loving the name he is given, but also wants to be assigned a function by one he sees as superior to himself. He is wrestling with a lawful past and a chaotic present, and it's interesting to see which of the two identities will win out in the end. We haven't quite finished talking about Ravel either. You see, the hag we meet in the maze is somewhat akin to the trunk of a great tree. While Ravel has remained here for a long time, she has let pieces of herself run to the planes and take on entire identities of their own. Similar to the Nameless One's incarnations, these identities are unaware of each other. I think the most notable one is Old Mebeth. Mebeth was my first trainer in the ways of wizardry, and she's the only one who doesn't simply disappear after Ravel's death. At least not right away. Her final farewell is somewhat touching, and really shows that somewhere beneath all of Ravel's spite and wickedness, there was a genuine care and tenderness that motivated her to do what she did. Here in this place, all I did was the mending of things and bodies, setting bones and delivering babies. In all these things, I was content. She sighs. As for being that other, that Ravel, she licks her lips again. I think you take for granted what a comfort it would be, oft-times to misplace a memory or two. Even this is not exactly the end of her. When Chris Avalone in a forum post talked about Ravel, he said, "She also shows up in Icewind Dale too. She's the elderly lady with the cats in Targos. And she's also the seer in Icewind Dale Heart of Winter. In general, the clues of Ravel's incarnations are that the incarnations have bad eyesight or are blind, are female, and are usually elderly, though not always. They usually have dreams or visions about the planes, since they are subconsciously tied to the other incarnations across the planes. So, if you've seen anyone like that in any other Obsidian games, maybe keep your distance. All in all though, this shows what a detailed and layered character this is, versus what one might come to expect from a night hag. I guess the only thing left to bring up here is the side quests. The thing I love about this game is that just about everything exists to teach us some new facts about the planes, or introduce you to some different race or ideology that we find in this melting pot of Sigil. There is only one bounty style quest to bring the tails of cranium rats to a local official, who will only take them from you one at a time in exchange for an absolute pittance. It seems to have been deliberately designed to be insufferable and push people away from it. We are rarely asked to be delivery boy or do simple fetch quests, and one of the earliest times we do, we wind up lugging around a cursed box and trying to figure out how to safely disentangle our fate from it. As someone who'd already played D&D and read the Manual of the Planes, it was a little tedious at times to have people explain in detail things I already knew about. But there are likely many people who don't know about things like petitioners and the Blood War, and more importantly, the Nameless one doesn't know, and he's the one who's asking. So there aren't any throwaway quests here either. Nothing that doesn't enrich the setting or feel like a worthwhile side jaunt into something interesting and fun. While Planescape received massive critical acclaim and even won awards, its sales were considered by some to be disappointing. They certainly weren't bad, and I doubt Interplay lost money on the project, but they weren't up to the standards of the likes of Fallout or Baldur's Gate. Various reasons have been attributed to this, one being the box art and the marketing overall being somewhat limited. In interviews, the developers have said themselves that mistakes were made with the game. On one hand, the game is shamelessly what it is. On the other hand, while I think that is exactly what makes it so brilliant, it may also be what alienated a lot of players or turned away those looking for just another Baldur's Gate. In my mind though, Planescape Torment's biggest problem is probably being a CRPG using the D&D license that was released in the late 90s. Of course, there was innovation aplenty going on in this era, but there were also established ideas of what certain genres were supposed to give people. As such, Torment became a square peg that was being driven through a round hole. This story simply isn't designed to work with 2nd edition D&D, at least not in a video game. The simple fact is, massive sections of the Dungeons Dragons system is all about how good your character is at killing things. Whether it be feats, stats, magic spells, or equipment, much more attention is given to how it helps your character fight, and combat takes up one of the biggest sections of the player handbook. This is because it is expected that at some point, you'll be exploring some dungeons, and possibly battling some dragons. Throwing out combat in the tabletop game isn't such a big issue, as you can resolve things through pure role-playing, without rolling a dice once if your DM is so inclined. But once you downplay or cut it out of a video game, a huge amount of your character choices suddenly amount to very little. This game is very generous with its stat upgrades, but the fact is, the most important decisions I made for my character were right at the start of the game. By dumping points into these 3 stats, I had the biggest impact I could possibly have on the game's main mechanic, its dialogue trees. These two are somewhat traditional in how they essentially keep cycling back to the main topic menu and never shut you out of anything. They are fine because the writing is so damn good that I want to click through all the topics and learn all the things and find all the little secrets buried in them. But very little about my class, my skills, or my level are going to change my experience at all. Fast forward to 2019 and the release of Disco Elysium. Here we have an indie CRPG heavily inspired by this game with a completely bespoke system that revolves around the game's dialogue trees. In this game, every point you spend matters because regardless of which stats you choose to raise, all of them lead to opening up more dialogue options. This not only rewards you for your choices all through the game, but opens up a lot of replayability and makes each build interesting and a little different. and I'm going to be honest, I've already said this, but the combat is trash in this game, and I would have been perfectly fine with it being completely removed in favour of some descriptions and skill checks. But then it wouldn't have been D&D, and Interplay probably wouldn't have wanted to make it, and people might have been more cautious about buying it. While the late 90s and the early 2000s was a melting pot of innovation, it didn't have anything like the indie scene that we have now. Still, all that aside, this is one of the best and deepest stories I've played in a video game, probably ever. I had an incredible time exploring this strange and interesting world, and interacting with all its inhabitants, from the mundane to the completely absurd. Watching the Nameless one uncover the mystery of his past selves and, in my case at least, strive to be better than that this time around was moving and inspiring. And while the story ends in a satisfying way, and the Nameless one ultimately chooses to meet his fate head on, rather than continue to let others suffer and die in his place, the finality of it leaves something hollow inside. Even if somehow there were to be more Planescape one day, there will be no more of this character and this crew. A few of them might show up here and there, but they wouldn't be all together again. The journey was over. The man that had brought them all together was gone, and there is little else left to do but to try and move on with our lives. While they may feel the loss for his passing, the companions of the Nameless one are, at least in my playthrough, enriched because he was there, and hopefully they've all learned no matter how far you fall, it's never too late to turn around and try to climb out of the dark. In that regard, perhaps it simply takes a little self-reflection, empathy, companionship, and a desire to be better than you were before, to change the nature of a man. Well guys, thank you for making it to the end of one of my longest videos with me. This has been a hell of a lot of work, and I'm writing this without even having recorded the audio or edited the damn video yet. There's just so much here that it really was difficult to correctly structure my analysis in a meaningful and interesting way. I hope I came close, and if I didn't then, well, what the fuck are you even doing at this part of the video? Anyway, we made it, and this probably isn't the only video I'm going to make on this one, but we'll have to see once time frees up. So, what's next? Well, it was supposed to be Baldur's Gate. I was thinking about covering the whole series. However, I played about 8 sessions, and it was at the end of the 8th session, right around the bandit camp, that I realised I'd only enjoyed maybe 2 sessions, and had nothing but complaints about the game. So I'm going to leave that for another time. As such, a project I had planned for later in the year has been moved up a couple of months, and I'm now working on the script to talk about the first RPG I ever played. Another tale of a hero with an identity crisis, but also long-haired androgynous villains, oversized swords, and probably the first moment a game ever made me cry. I am of course talking about Final Fantasy VII. Well, well, well. What are you still doing hanging around here? Sorry, I don't have a new signing off animation just yet, but I only recently made this one, and I haven't quite decided what to make for a new one with the fantasy avatar. Well, that wraps up another video, and thank you for making it all the way to the super secret sign off at the end. Don't tell anyone who didn't make it here about this, but throw me an updated my journal in the comments so I can see who made it all the way here. I think it is safe to say that summer is here in Japan, and I am blasting my AC almost constantly. In about 2 weeks' time my job will be winding down, and I'll be heading back to the UK for a couple of weeks in August to spend time with my parents in Scotland. If you're looking for a good game to pick up in the summer sales, I'm currently loving the crap out of, and I am going to struggle to say this, Anno Mutationem. If I get a spare few weeks, I might do a short video on it because it's got style. But I already have some plans for the coming months, possibly leading all the way to the end of the year. I don't want to say what just yet because of how easily my mind can change, but it should be fun. Anyway guys, I hope you're keeping well. If you're here, I'll politely remind you to click a few links in the description and follow me in a few places, and with that, I'll wish you a great July and a great summer. Stay hydrated and stay awesome.